So, Chapter 23 of Two Blue Vortex is officially leaked, and boy oh boy, do we have some peak on our hands. Listen, admittedly, it's been a couple of chapters since we had an absolutely Ikemoto writing with a pen on fire kind of chapter, but boy oh boy is the long wait over. Because while absolutely monumental cliffhangers and reveals at the end of chapters used to be in every month occurrence, unfortunately as you round into the meat of the post-time skip era, you can't necessarily do that every single chapter. But you can apparently do it for Chapter 23. Because this chapter's got it all. It's got a massively important fights, characters showing up out of the blue to save the day, power-ups, powers that we didn't understand that well, getting important exposition, and most importantly, the establishment of the beginning of what could be the most important fight we've seen yet in Two Blue Vortex. Yes, Ikemoto was absolutely cooking with gas when he cooked up this chapter, and I cannot wait to get into it with you. So with no further ado, I bring to you Chapter 23 of Two Blue Vortex Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video, we can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series in the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on to the written exam. 1010 is cheating using mirrors. So, Chapter 23 starts away from where Chapter 22 left off. That is to say that it opens with a battlefield scattered with the remains of defeated Claw Grimes, as Mitsuki in his activated Snake Sage mode stands as the lone victor on this battlefield. And narrator Sama tells us that Mitsuki fighting alone has defeated all of the Claw Grimes, which is really impressive. See, not only are these not all augmented Claw Grimes, covered with claw marks that could possibly spawn additional Claw Grimes, and with some of them possessing Rinnegan that give them powers I guess we don't fully understand at this current moment, but also Mitsuki has been fighting this entire time while protecting Sarada's unconscious body. And while it's kind of hard for us to conceptualize exactly how powerful a Claw Grime is, this is one of the more impressive feats that we have from Sage Mode Mitsuki. Anyways, as Mitsuki is standing upon all of the corpses that he's created from these Claw Grimes, we see Konohamaru running up to him, Matsuri Soulthorn in hand. And as he stumbles up to Mitsuki, he asks him if he's okay. We then cut to a little bit later on with Mitsuki's Sage Mode now deactivated and Sarada around his shoulders, and we see that Mitsuki has told Konohamaru that Ourea has gone after Ryu's Soulthorn to return it to Shinki. And it's at this moment that Mitsuki tells Konohamaru that he's also heading to where Shinki turned into a tree. Now, rather wildly, the next thing that Konohamaru says is that what happened to Yoda was truly unfortunate, but the divine trees are foes that demand the level of resolve that requires putting your life on the line. And thus, she knew what she was getting into, and therefore she would simply be happy that we got Ryu's Soulthorn back. Now, this is insane because we've been hypothesizing for the last couple of weeks that Yoda wasn't actually going to be hard killed off. They set up Yoda as Shinki's love interest and then immediately punched a cannonball-sized hole in her, something that we've seen Inogen survive from. However, considering the fact that Ourea has abandoned the scene and Mitsuki is walking away from the scene of Yodo's death with Sarada around his shoulders and not Yodo, seems to all but confirm that Yodo is dead and gone. And while that's not the biggest loss of all time, oh no, we lost the Boruto equivalent of Tamari, except she's way less interesting and gets less screen time, it does bring up a funny parallel between father and son, that is between Gaara and Shinki, in that neither of them will apparently ever be married to a woman, because the one woman that was into Shinki is now, I guess, sand fertilizer. Anyways, before Mitsuki can head off to where Shinki has been turned into a tree, Konohamaru tells him that the mission isn't over, and that they have to escape Jura. Now, it's at this moment that Mitsuki tells Konohamaru that he's saw Jura when Jura emerged from a Claw Grime, but Jura didn't seem interested in them, as in Team 7 and 2/3, or even the Soulthorns. And rather, the only thing he was interested in doing was killing Boruto, and he saw the direction that they went to go fight in, which was very far away. Konohamaru responds to this info dump with one of his own, as he tells Mitsuki that he was actually on the verge of being killed by Matsuri, but then Boruto showed up and saved his life, cutting down Matsuri. However, immediately after he cut down Matsuri, Jura arrived, which leads Konohamaru to the conclusion that currently for the Shinju, their most important goal is killing Boruto, even more so than reacquiring the Soulthorns, which are essentially the lives of the Shinju comrades. And it appears as though Boruto saving Konohamaru's life and the Shinju, who are the enemy of Konoha, seeming so singularly focused on killing Boruto, has started to scramble Konohamaru's thoughts. I mean, Konohamaru is pretty much the most notably affected by omnipotence person that's still amongst the main cast of characters. And yet, like Boruto has done time and time again since the the end of the time skip, Boruto flying in the time of need of a main character from Two Blue Vortex and saving and or sparing their lives has seemed to convince Konohamaru that there might be something going on with Boruto that he doesn't fully understand. Now, in response to the news that Boruto is battling against Jura by himself, Mitsuki turns to his sensei and says, Konohamaru, let's go to Boruto and back him up in his battle against Jura, re-solidifying that Mitsuki is still firmly in the camp of Team Boruto, which is rather interesting because while Mitsuki was temporarily broken out of omnipotence by Boruto sparing his life and asking him a couple of key and crucial questions about the idea of Kawaki being his son, we know that even if you break out of the iron grip of omnipotence, you slowly but surely sink back into it. And yet Mitsuki, even though he may not necessarily understand why he's Team Boruto, is still Team Boruto. But Konohamaru tells him, no, our mission is the recovery of the Soul Thorns. Boruto understands that too. In fact, the only reason that I was able to escape is because Boruto distracted Jura. And thus Konohamaru tells Mitsuki that our current mission is to get to exactly where Boruto told us to go, which is the location that Team 7 grouped up with Araya and Yodo originally, which is just it's some other part of the Land of Wind. And Mitsuki doesn't necessarily understand these directions, but Konohamaru says, hey, that's just what Boruto told me to do. And right now, the only choice we have is to trust him, further solidifying that the last holdout in Team 7 that no longer was Team Boruto may have finally switched his allegiance. And just in time, because I swear Konohamaru was getting on my last nerve. We then cut back to Boruto and Jura. And Boruto is gripping his side, talking about how an injury he has missed the vital spot, but it's still deeper than he anticipated. And if you're wondering to yourself, when did Boruto get hurt in this battle against Jura? I feel like he's been landing all of the crucial blows here. When Jura grabbed him up with his wood from the ground that Boruto broke with his Rasengan Uzehiko, it's that moment in time that we saw some blood start to trickle out of Boruto's mouth. And apparently that wood pierced into his side. But while Boruto is trying to place pressure on his side wound, Jura loads up a tailed beast bomb with his right eye. However, upon realizing that Jura was loading up a tailed beast ball, Boruto flies into the air and dodges the explosion. Now, to this point, I'd like to point out that there's been some theories floating around that Jura's different tailed beast balls are tied to different eyes. And seemingly, that's true. Jura seems to fire his sniper-like tailed beast ball out of his left Rinnegan, and his explosive tailed beast ball out of his right. And this kind of thing would make a fair amount of sense, though jutsu abilities do seem to be split up between eyes fairly often, with the most prominent example being Mangekyo Sharingan abilities. Though those do seem to be somewhat interchangeable on account of the fact that Sasuke's Amaterasu eye was his left eye until his left eye was destroyed, and literally immediately after being stabbed in the left eye, he uses Amaterasu out of his right eye, which seems to imply that if you awake something like DMS, you're able to use whatever Mangekyo Sharingan ability you want out of whatever eye. And that kind of line of thinking is important for the end of this chapter, because while in the beginning of the chapter, Jura seems to fire all of his explosive tailed beast balls from his right eye and his sniper ones from his left eye, by the end of this chapter, that's no longer the case, which does seem to solidify the idea that all dojutsu abilities that you unlock are stored in both eyes, and therefore simply unlocking the ability seems to be the most important thing, which gives some credence to the idea that Madara was able to use his Susanoo while having no eyes, because it's an ability that he unlocked by having DMS and then later DEMS. Anyways, moving immediately forward, as Boruto flies out of the top of the smoke plume created by the tailed beast ball, he clings to a nearby rock staring down at Jura, who realizes that the time that it takes to create and fire a tailed beast ball is going to be incredibly disadvantageous in a battle against somebody as fast and perceptive as Boruto. And thus he comes to the conclusion that the tailed beast ball is only going to be effective while sniping from extreme ranges or by using his scatter technique at extremely close ranges. Now, I'm not entirely sure what he means by his scatter technique, as he's really only ever displayed two different kinds of tailed beast ball, the explodey kind and the snipey kind, and a scatter type firing seems to imply some kind of shotgun blast of tailed beast balls. And while he definitely has shown the ability to fire them in rapid succession, I don't know if I would call that scatter type. But for the moment, let's just assume that scatter type refers to the explodey kind. Anyways, Jura pounces at Boruto and begins to fire the explodey kind of tailed beast ball at him, and Boruto once again flies away. But Jura, who's apparently part F-22, gets into a literal dogfight with Boruto and starts chasing him down, all the while firing tailed beast balls at him. And Boruto, while dodging these tailed beast balls, turns around and throws a kunai at Jura, which he dodges, but much like his grandfather, Boruto was anticipating on him dodging. And thus Boruto immediately uses Flying Raijin to jump behind Jura and slash at him with his blade. But Jura anticipates this slash coming from behind him and blocks it with his a weird black long middle finger, and he blocks the strike with such force that it forces Boruto to drop his sword, or at least that's what Boruto wants Jura to think. Because as the blade falls towards the earth, once again Boruto jumps to it using flying Raijin, grabs it, and slices off Jura's left leg, which causes Jura to grit his teeth and admit that Boruto is fighting quite well against him, and the two of them engage in a classic high-speed anime clash that manifests as just a couple of glints on the page. However, in this fervent exchange of blows, Jura is faster and stronger, and eventually is able to land a flurry of blows to Boruto's abdomen and even grab his wrist that's holding his sword. But Boruto is not deterred by Jura having a grasp of him as he activates purple lightning and electrocutes the both of them, which causes Jura to lose his grip of Boruto's wrist. Now, this isn't the first time that we've seen Boruto use purple lightning in the post-time skip era. We still don't know how he learned it, most likely from Sasuke, but we just don't know. Anyways, as the two of them separate, we see that Boruto is panting. Jura begins to laugh at him, telling him that his movements have begun to get sluggish. And Boruto doesn't even have the energy to retort. And it's this moment that Jura thinks aloud out to himself that rather than clumsily trying to hit him with a tailed beast ball, maybe beating him to death would just be quicker. But before we can see Jura try to act on that, we cut to Konohamaru and Mitsuki, who have apparently made it to the spot that Boruto told them to go to. However, now that they're there, they don't understand why they're there, and there's nobody else and nothing else there. They just know that this is where Boruto told them to be, and thus they're in the right spot. Technically. But then cut back to Jura and Boruto as Jura absolutely flies at Boruto, landing a flying knee on his chin that knocks Boruto back, and Jura grabs Boruto by his collar and throws a punch into his abdomen, spiking him down into the ground below. Jura then apparently abandons the idea of just trying to beat him to death and nukes the area that he spiked Boruto down into with a massive tailed beast ball. But out of the following smoke plume, Boruto flies. But as soon as he leaves the smoke, Jura is behind him, swinging at him with his left super long black middle finger. However, Boruto is able to block the incoming attack with Sasuke's sword. However, we see very visibly that Sasuke's sword has now become chipped, something that distracts Boruto long enough that Jura is able to load up a gigantic kick with his right leg and once again spike Boruto back to the ground. And as Boruto lays there face down, seemingly unconscious, we cut to Ada, who's watching the entire battle with her Senryon. As she says, "It's no use anymore. I can't watch this. Boruto's going to be killed." And all the while, Kashin Koji is sitting with his hood on and his head in his hands, staring between his legs in a pseudo-fetal position, as Ada continues talking to him, saying, "Koji, are you there? Are you listening?" But Koji tells Ada to be quiet for a second because it's coming, a new update. And we see Koji's eyes roll into the back of his head. And thus, for the first time, we see how the Tenpat's ability works in real time. We see that all of the futures that Kashin Koji had envisioned have now gone blank, and we see new visions of new futures begin to appear in front of him. And in these new futures, we see Inujin, and we see Jura holding his right eye. We see Himawari, and we see Boruto rising from the smoke. Now, when you think Inujin and you think Himawari, you think of Chapter 10, when Inujin flew in to protect Himawari and then was summarily stabbed through the abdomen using Jura's wood release in a wound that would have killed him if Himawari didn't have some crazy regeneration factor that she was able to leech onto his body. But mind you, that was in the past, and the Tenpats doesn't show the past, it shows the future. On top of this, Inujin doesn't appear to be standing on somewhere that looks like Earth. He appears to be on some kind of alien planet. And thus what Kashin Koji may be seeing is another Inujin-based battle where him and Himawari have to battle against high-level talent. At least that's really the only possible explanation I can come to as to why Inujin and Himawari would both be shown in his Tenpats prediction. But I'm going to be looking at the more high-res scans when they're out, and I'll try and see if I can't suss out exactly what's going on with all of these possible predictions of the future that Kashin Koji is showing us using the Tenpats. Now, there's one panel of the future that Kashin Koji begins to focus on, and it's Jura holding his right eye. And all Koji can say is, "This is." At which point Ada pops in and says, "What is this? What do you mean something's coming?" We then cut back to Jura and Boruto, and Jura's simply floating over Boruto's unconscious body as he scoffs at him and says, "Still breathing, huh? You're tougher than I expected." As expected of an Otsutsuki, I suppose. And even after losing consciousness, he's still holding on to his master's blade. And it's this point that we see that Boruto is, yes, still holding Sasuke's sword. Now, to this point that Jura says, "Well, in honor of your extraordinary spirit, as he begins to ascend into the sky, I'll make your death a quick one and blow you away." And it's this moment that he begins to charge up his right eye for a tailed beast ball that will presumably kill Boruto. But before he can fire it through the back of his head and out his right eye sticks a gigantic black chakra rod. And in the next page we see standing atop of Jura's back is Kawaki, as he says out loud to himself and Jura, yeah, I guess he really is a monster. Something like this wouldn't kill him. Now, Ada, who's been watching this entire battle, starts to freak out as she realizes that Kawaki is now on the battlefield, and she asks Kashin Koji what's possibly going on right now. And Koji responds to her by saying it's a new update. There's been about 6 days since the 10 Pats updated. Now, this is really interesting, because while we had some semblance of an idea about how the 10 Pats worked, that is to say that we understood that Kashin Koji was able to see all the unlimited futures that could possibly unfurl, and that Kashin Koji very specifically didn't want all that many people knowing about his 10 path ability, because the more people that know about his 10 paths and the predictions of his 10 paths, the more people can change those possible futures, which makes his 10 paths ability technically less accurate. What this new update system is kind of showing us is that the real reason that Kashin Koji doesn't want other people knowing about his predictions or his ability in the first place is because every time that something happens outside of the purview of all of the predictions that the 10 paths have made, his ability releases a new update with new infinite possibilities. And because Boruto went to Kawaki and told him about the limiters that were placed on him by Amado, something he knew about because of the 10 paths, Kawaki was able to go to Amado and get his limiters lifted, which allowed for him to enter into this battle and give Boruto a fighting chance against Jura, a future that apparently the 10 paths could not predict, which is interesting, because here's the thing. If technically the 10 paths are able to show you infinite possibilities, one of those possibilities should have been Boruto explaining to Kawaki that he had limiters on him and Kawaki getting those limiters off. A truly limitless potential future sight ability would take into account that people who know about the ability are able to convey the information given to them by said ability to other people, which either speaks to the idea that A, the 10 paths is severely limited, or B, Boruto lies outside of the purview of the 10 paths, a theory we've actually talked about rather extensively on this channel, and a theory we've been talking about again on Sunday, so make sure you hit that noti bell, because this information could potentially rewrite everything that we thought we understood about how the 10 paths works. Anyways, Koji continues by saying, Kawaki joining in. This is a development I've never seen before. Boruto must have told them something in the last couple of days, once again implying that Boruto's conversation with Kawaki is what befuddled the 10 paths, which makes it seem like Boruto always had the intention of flying off to the Land of Wind to help Team 7 and 2/3 in their battle against Ryu and Matsuri, fully understanding that Jura was going to show up there because he understood the Kashin Koji's telling of the future from the 10 paths was not accurate. Anyways, we then cut to Mitsuki, Konohamaru, and the unconscious Sarada, and we see that Mitsuki is looking around the site. Konohamaru then turns to Mitsuki and asks him what he's looking for, to which Mitsuki responds by saying, well, Boruto chose this location for a reason, right? He probably left one of those metal marks he jumps to all the time. But before Mitsuki or Konohamaru are able to find a piece of metal that Boruto's going to use flying Raijin to jump to, Delta descends down from the sky, saying, there they are, right here. Konohamaru, Mitsuki, and Sarada. Looks like all 3 of them are safe. Now, this is interesting, because the easy answer to answer how Delta could have possibly understood to come to this location is that Kawaki told her. Her and Kawaki probably flew there together, and Kawaki said, hey, go to this location and pick up Team 7. And that's all well and good, except why would Kawaki know where they were going to be sent? We saw Boruto and Kawaki's conversation. We saw Boruto describe to Kawaki that he had limiters placed on him by Amado, specifically so that Kawaki wouldn't die and so that Kawaki could be used to bring Akebi back to life. However, nowhere over the course of that conversation do either of them ever talk about working collaboratively to fight against Jura in the upcoming days. They don't formulate a plan to battle against Jura in the Land of Wind, and they certainly don't formulate a plan to save Team 7 at a certain location. So how did Delta know where to find Sarada, Mitsuki, and Konohamaru? Well, we don't really know. Either Boruto has been working more collaboratively with Kawaki and Delta than we previously realized, or somehow, someway, Boruto and Kawaki have an intermediary that's not Ada, because Ada didn't know Kawaki was going to show up on the battlefield, that's helping them pass information to and fro. And I think that person may just be Himawari. See, not only was Himawari shown in the 10 Paths prediction, most of which happened in this literal chapter, but Himawari is a person who's beloved and protected by both of the brothers in this equation. On top of this, it was recently revealed by Ikemoto that Himawari decided to continue living in the Hyuga Uzumaki residence by herself. So there's a possibility that the Naruto household has been used as a central meeting point for Himawari, Boruto, and Kawaki to possibly plan out an anti-Shinju strategy. But this is something that possibly Ada would have been privy to. So there's a lot of layers to this, which is why we have to dedicate an entire video to breaking down exactly how this could have happened. Now, at this point, the Konohamaru and Mitsuki turn up to the sky towards Delta and scream at her name in complete surprise. We then cut back to Kawaki and Jura, and Jura tries to reach back onto his own back to grab Kawaki to rip him off, but Kawaki shrinks himself, instead appearing behind Jura and hurtling a barrage of chakra rods at him that pierce Jura in multiple points. And it's at this point in time that we see that Jura's right eye has been destroyed, and his leg still hasn't healed. And yet from his left eye, he generates a tailed beast ball of the explodey kind. And we know this because Kawaki shrinks himself to avoid the tailed beast ball, and it explodes far off in the distance. Which, like I said, seems to confirm the fact that he can make either kind of tailed beast ball from either eye, but he just seems to choose different eyes for different purposes for, I don't know, maybe aesthetic reasoning? Now we then cut to Boruto, who's still on the ground. However, his eyes are open and he's groaning. Now Kawaki lands next to him and says something rather interesting. He says, "Hey, you damn brother." And this isn't a mistranslation. He calls him kyodai, which means brother in Japanese. Now this is interesting because Kawaki is seemingly referring to Boruto as his family, something that Kawaki from a couple of chapters ago almost definitely wouldn't have done. Once again implying that some kind of further connection has been made between Boruto and Kawaki, like some kind of burnt bridge has been mended. But anyways, Kawaki says, "You damn brother, how long are you gonna lie there?" To which Boruto responds to by saying, "You're the one who's lagging behind, dumbass." Once again implying that Boruto always anticipated on Kawaki coming. Now Jura is completely baffled at the idea that Kawaki has showed up on this battlefield, as he thinks to himself, what's going on? His power level is completely different than it was before, confirming to us that Kawaki was successful in getting his limiters removed, which also means he was successful in intimidating Amado to remove his limiters before placing a karma marking on the Akebi clone, as Kawaki stated that he wouldn't place a karma marking on the Akebi clone until he was powered up and the divine trees were taken care of. So if Kawaki were to hypothetically die in this battle, Amado would have no way to bring Akebi back. But anyways, after Jura's done glazing Kawaki, Kawaki begins to activate his karma marking, and while doing so, he tells Boruto to clench his teeth and power through, because if he loses control, he'll kill him right here on the spot. And thus, while Kawaki did refer to Boruto as brother, it seems as though this alliance is only standing so long as Boroshiki doesn't come out to play, and probably ends as soon as the divine trees are defeated. Now there is a small problem here. Boruto is currently relatively incapacitated, and Kawaki just activated his karma marking directly next to Boruto. And as we know from the last time that Kawaki activated his karma marking around Boruto, their karma markings resonate. So much so that Boruto literally had to flee the scene of where Kawaki was at because he had to reel back in his karma marking the last time Kawaki activated his karma marking around him, which is why Boruto's most likely shown in the last page of the chapter holding the back of his karma hand, as he's most likely trying to fight back his own karma from manifesting, as he fears that Momoshiki will be able to take over his body if it does. And yet the last thing that he says in this chapter is telling Kawaki to not worry about him and to go for it. And thus the last thing that we get from this chapter is Jura flying at Kawaki, and Kawaki standing with a chakra rod telling Jura to bring it, you damn bastard, with the side text at the end of the chapter saying, "The blade that carves fate only swings once. Even if one side breaks, the other strikes without pause." An obvious reference to the fact that Boruto could not defeat Jura alone, and while he was battling against Jura, he broke Sasuke's blade. So what will happen in next chapter? Will Kawaki be able to defeat Jura, or will Boruto's karma marking manifest bringing out Boroshiki? Well, we won't know for a month, but I will be making videos hypothesizing what I do believe we're going to see in chapter 24, so make sure you're hitting that noti bell. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think about chapter 23? Do you think it was one of the best chapters of Two Blue Vortex ever, or was it okay? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, there's also some pretty crazy things happening in the One Piece manga, so I gotta go cover that.